Hello, name's Simeon Toderick, and I, in the past, have run a YouTube channel, I still do, called If the Foundation Be Shaken, which I basically argue for a more into the what used to be pretty much Hebrew Bible biblical minimalism, as well as a bit of Dutch radical understanding of the New Testament. And I was going through my channel basically trying to do just that for about a year and a half. Did a few interviews, wrote a couple of papers for Dr. Price. Um, but here's the thing about now. The reason I'm making this is because I posted a video on my YouTube channel. I deleted a lot of material, and the reason I posted that video, I said my perspective had changed, but I didn't really give too much about it. I wanted to get into it, but you'll understand why I kind of chose not to at that point in time. Now, I don't, I'm not tied down to one particular um, theory on biblical composition. I move where the evidence takes me. At one time, I didn't even consider biblical minimalism. I was in what you would call more mainstream, the Bible composed in the Babylonian and Persian periods and all that. But I moved into biblical minimalism because the evidence supported it. And the same thing. Well, some about let's see, how long ago was this? About 2 years ago or so, someone brought to my attention the works of P.R. Brown, where he put forth a theory that Christianity is a 4th century religion and that the texts of the so-called church fathers were merely backdated, etc. And I worked within his model. I didn't completely agree with it, but I worked within his model, and I wrote another paper called Christianity, a 4th century religion, and I, point out various things. Now, I think that was around the beginning of 2024 that Dr. Price released that in his Journal of Higher Criticism, and I was going to reboot the channel at that time, but I didn't, because as I was thinking about this and forced to research the 4th century, I was also researching a century that I never dealt with before, and that is the 3rd century CE. Now, 1st century, goes without saying that mainstream going to look there. They're looking at the 2nd century. I dealt a lot with the 2nd century. And now the 4th century, but you got the 3rd century in the way. And you sort of got to look through it to see what the history of that is. And when I started looking into the 3rd century, this is where everything changed for me about the beginning of 2024. Because I looked through one of the big events in the 3rd century was the, what did they call it? Sassanians, the Sassanian invasion of the Parthian Empire, and they basically pushed Rome right out of the Middle East for a short period of time. Well, what did they call their leader? Now, the title they gave their leader was Cyrus. It was the same name as the 6th century BCE conqueror, Cyrus the Great. And they called themselves Persians. And how did they conquer Babylon, which is one of the things they did? Well, they used the same methods as Cyrus the Great. Diverted the waters of Euphrates, made the water, all the same. All the same. Everything was absolutely the same. Now, I was curious about this because this was kind of interesting. You have the same event occur about 900 years apart, and I'm just like, okay. Well, the other thing that shocked me was that the Book of Zoroaster was actually not even completed until around 240. So people assume it's Zoroastrianism back here, but when the book is actually completed over here. So this is kind of alright. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, well, this is kind of already happened twice in history. So I started looking through. Now we have AI. So I started asking, there's not a time in history that this happened. And there is. It happened in the 15th century and in the early 16th century. And both times, they used the same method to conquer Babylon or Baghdad. They called themselves the Persians, and they called one of the titles of their ruler was Cyrus. Every single time. And this, in the back of my mind, now I tell you this story so you can understand my perspective. When I first started coming into biblical criticism, it was well over a decade ago. And I'm searching YouTube, and I came across this theory that seemed so outrageous, so ridiculous, so idiotic. This is how close-minded I was back then. And it was ridiculous, it was idiotic, and I just threw it away, basically. Again, this is my methodology. I'm ashamed to say I was like that one. But I never forgot it. I never forgot that theory. It was always in the back of my mind. But I just didn't think about it. Well, over time, I've taught myself not to be in that mindset. I always be a free thinker. If someone has an outrageous theory, I want to hear about it. I might not agree with it, but it's going to go on a shelf. I have a huge bookshelf in my head of just theories that I don't completely agree with, but they're there, they're sitting there, and if I ever need them, I'll pull them out and see if there's anything to them. Well, that's how I think now. So, I remembered this theory because it actually solved the problem of all these repeats in history. So I decided, okay, look, I don't agree with this theory, but I'm just going to put things aside for a moment and just really investigate this theory and see what it's really about. Now, let me just tell you what it says on Wikipedia about this theory. It says it's a pseudo-historical theory. Okay, so that's the first thing you're going to find out if you look at Wikipedia. Let me just tell you something. Wikipedia is a bunch of crap. I'm sorry to say. It's edited by people. And, yeah, it essentially has a cult mentality. But I'm going to show you that it's not pseudo-history pretty quickly. Now, so I decided to go back and I looked into it. And I went through the video series. I started going through the books. And it struck me that there is actually something to this. And so I started, looking, okay, if that's so, where would I fit the Bible? Because that's my main interest. So I started fitting the Bible in. I started looking at, if this and this is like that, where would this be? Just playing with it. And I started coming across some discoveries that just started to blow my mind. It didn't make sense. And there was actually some statistical impossibilities that started arising that kind of leaned in that direction. Things started looking statistically impossible for there not to be something to this theory. And I haven't named it yet because I'm going to get into it. Now, since that, and I wrote another paper for Dr. Price on this subject, but I didn't know too much about it, and I just approached it kind of, hey, isn't it interesting that this happened? Well, since that time, I've done a lot of research. I've been led astray on some AI platforms. I've done work on others, and now I always check them against each other. I always check them against mainstream sources. I always go to everything. Now, the theory is basically called new chronology, and I'm going to actually make a distinction because I'm not talking about David Rule. Okay. Talking about a much more different theory. Although David Rule might have something to some of his theories, I'm not even going to deal with that because it has nothing to do with that. Now, when you hear that, you're going to do probably what I did and just dismiss it right off the hand because you're closed-minded and you're in a cult-like state and you're not able to have criticism. Well, just hear me out for a moment because I don't just come at things and just do that. No, I investigate things, and like I said, there's statistical impossibilities that start arising, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So, just the mainstream, and I'm talking Will Durant's, this is the Age of Reason. In this book, he details how we got our chronology, and I say BCE, CE, or BCAD, or whatever you want to do. And he details how that came about, and it came about in 1588 from the mind of Joseph Justice Gallagher working with the Jesuits. Now, I'm not talking conspiracy here. There might be some conspiracy to Jesuits. I get that. Come on, this is knowledge. We know the Catholic Church does stupid things like this. Look, but I'm not talking conspiracy. I'm just talking about science here. Gallagher took numerous history books and he put together the chronology of the world in 1588. Now, who would criticize that? Because that's the same history, just the same chronology. Everybody used the same chronology. You used the same chronology. We learned in school the same chronology. Everybody in the world used, except for certain places in the Middle East that use a different chronology. But even there, when they go into an academic institution, they're forced into the Western mindset of using this chronology. So everybody uses it, and it had become a cult to the extent that more people believe in this chronology than believe in Jesus. Let's just put it that way. Including me. I mean, I was always using the same model. Everybody uses the same model chronology. Why? Because it's based on science? No, it's not. Because it's based on somebody that basically took Gallagher Petavius, who will find it a few years later. He took the history to build a chronology, and from that we get the history. And that's basically the way that the Gallagher model. So even when things are radiocarbon dated, which has many issues with it, they're very seldom are they sent to a different lab to do testing. They're usually tested in one lab, and then they look at the timeline and say, well, these are erroneous findings here, but this one fits because they give different results. When you get a radiocarbon date, it doesn't give you one date, it gives you a spectrum of dates. They throw the ones that are erroneous and they fit them into the Gallagher model. So that's the first problem. Now, it's not like anybody has ever criticized this timeline. Well, no, kind of like Isaac Newton. Did you know that? Isaac Newton, who invented calculus, whose laws of physics we use, every day we use Newtonian calculations. If you're in science or anything, the rockets you send into space, you're using Newtonian physics. You're using calculus too, which is something that Newton had to invent in order to build his model. But Newton's last book was the Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms Amended, and he basically said that Galilean chronology is rubbish, it's garbage, according to mathematics. And he mapped out a new theory of history. But he didn't have very many resources. He's working in the 18th century, he doesn't have very many resources. 17th century, somewhere around there. He doesn't have very many resources. Now, in the 19th century, another Russian mathematician named Morozov started looking at this, and he also figured it out that this is garbage, the chronology is garbage. So these are not people that are conspiracy theorists or anything. These are scientists that are highly respected, mathematicians that are highly respected. And it's always a mathematician, isn't it? That's interesting. It's always a mathematician that looks at this and says, no, this chronology is wrong. Now, the person that's associated with new chronology is Anatoly Fomenko, who's also a mathematician. And if you look him up, and you disregard everything it says about new chronology, and you just look at what he's achieved and what he's done, this guy is one of the most highly educated mathematicians around. Now, when he proposed his new chronology theory, he didn't do it based on any conspiracy or anything like that. He did it based on science. I'm looking at lunar eclipses, I'm looking at the ancient records, and they say it's this time, but that's not what the records, that's not what the calculations show. I'm looking at horoscopes that are associated with ancient Egypt, but they date to this time. They don't date where they're supposed to. And that's basically how he started the new chronology. So what he did was he took the mathematics to build the chronology, and from that he had to interpret history, and it's always this part that people are mad about. They never can get into this part. I've seen one person on the internet get into the math of this, that criticizes it. And I've gone back and I've looked at this stuff and I said, no, I can actually look at the calculation. And I'm not a mathematician, but we don't need to do that because we got this. We got this. We can do the calculations without having to do that now. The point is, it's based originally on science. Now, there are many people that get into it that are doing conspiracy and all that sort of stuff. Again, I'm not saying there's not a conspiracy. I'm saying that basically what you're looking at is the error of one person. A person that erred. Now, were they what they're conspiracy by the Jesuits, etc.? Probably, but that has nothing to really do with it. If we just treat it as an error, then everything falls into place. Remember, it's one guy and refined by another guy. The Gauger-Petavius model, that's what we're all using. And the mathematicians come up and they say, no, that's a bunch of garbage. Now, when Fomenko first came out with this in the 70s, Gleb Navarsky actually criticized it. But then they started working together because Navarsky did the calculations, said, you know what, you're right. That's how science works. Now, when new chronology establishes a new chronology, then the history has to be interpreted in light of that chronology, which means that's why new chronology looks so strange. That's why most people reject it, including myself, because when you look at it, it looks ridiculous when compared to mainstream chronology with the Gauger-Petavius model, because it's using a new chronology that's based on these calculations. Now, I mentioned statistical impossibility, and I'm a mathematician, so I can only do that on AI calculations and all that. But let me just give you a few things, because we're into the Bible stuff here, so let's just give you a few things on the Bible. Now, here's a place I actually disagree with Fomenko and Navarsky. They date the book of Revelation to 1486. And they have a good reason for that. They look at Revelation chapter 6 and they point out this guy is not just coming up with weird magic mushroom visions or apocalyptic. He is apocalyptic, but they acknowledge that. But they say, you know, he actually might be looking at the sky and looking at different planets and things going by. So they calculate back when that sky occurred, and one of the dates they get is 1486. And I agree, that's true. You can map that out. But it also occurred in 1354. Now, what you can do, if you're smart, is you can go on and look up, read the book of Revelation, read the first several chapters, and then you go and you name people. This is the name of somebody that did this in Pergamum. This is the name of somebody that did this in Thyatira. It names people. And what mainstream chronology does, they place it in the 1st century, 2nd century, whatever. And it says, well, we can't find these people, we don't know about these people, but I guess the guy that wrote Revelation used them. They just lost the history. Well, okay. In 1486, this is where I disagree with Fomenko, because he didn't base this on math. He did. He based it on the sky, but I point out that sky occurs about 4 or 5 times in our history, that same sky. Another time is about 100 years earlier in 1354, and when you look around, let me just give you an example. John is just Katoma, let me see if I can pronounce it, Katomkizinos. He's basically John the Sixth of Trebizond. He's exiled. Now, most people say he's exiled here. No, there is actually attribution that he was in Patmos. To John and Patmos, okay, one person, I get that. Okay, just a minute now. I get this one person is nothing. How about this? In Revelation it says, in the days of Antipas, he's talking about Antipas that they knew in Pergamum. He had to be known in Pergamum. He had to have been killed. We'll come back to that because that's actually very important. Because I couldn't find him right away and I said, okay, this is wrong. How about this one? Jezebel. There has to be a Jezebel in Thyatira. You go, oh, the Old Testament reference. No. Just take the text as it is. Never mind the Old Testament. There has to be a Jezebel in Thyatira. And her name is Zabal. And she's in Thyatira. Just before 1354. Okay? Balaam. You mentioned Balaam. Don't go to the Old Testament. Take the book of Revelation. Balaam. We find this such a Balaam associated with 1354 in Byzantium. Are you listening now? Balak is also mentioned. Balak. It's Balaam and Balak. B-E-Y-L-I-K and Balaam, B-A-R-L-A-M. By the way, Balaam is a seer. By the way, archaeology actually confirms it. We just got to redate the archaeology, that's all, because it's actually an inscription, a prophecy of Balaam been found. The signs and plagues of Revelation. I'm not going to get into what happened in 1554 because if you actually open up a history book and look at what was going on in 1554 in Constantinople and surrounding areas, that was one of the worst times in history. People were dying left, right, and center. And I'm not going to tell you why because if you can't figure that out, then you got a problem. How about the Revelation 17:18, the fire? There had to be a fire. The fire in Rome. It never said the word Rome in Revelation 17:18. It said it's a city on seven hill. By the way, which is what Constantinople is. Did you know that Constantinople was called Jerusalem? By the common people, it was called Jerusalem. Now, predictability. I've already got a lot of statistical improbability because those names shouldn't just line up with a date like this that fits the guy. Antipas. I could not find an Antipas associated with Pergamum until I realized something. Antipas means against the father. It's a nickname. So I looked. Antiochus III, associated with Pergamum, was killed. That's what I mean by predictability. That's science. If I can't find it, then it's wrong. Everything else. How about the tribes of Israel? The tribes of Israel. Every single one of the tribes of Israel listed in Revelation because Dan and Ephraim are missing, and so I have to be very careful about that. The tribes of Israel that are listed in Revelation chapter 7. If you go to Trebizond, which is in north on the Black Sea, which is where John the Sixth was from, and where Antiochus was sent from to Pergamum, if you go to Trebizond, they call themselves the people of God, Israel. That's what they call themselves. All the groups are all the same as the 12 tribes. All the list that's in Revelation chapter 7 is associated with Trebizond, 14th century. Now, I did a calculation of how much this would be. Like just all the possibilities all lining up with that year. 1 in a trillion. So now, this is what I mean by statistical impossibility. When it comes to other things that I've talked about, like Paul and Marcion, they're talking about that radical sort of stuff. Interesting, it all works out too. Now, someone could scream at me something about the Dead Sea Scrolls and all that. Look, I already talked about radiocarbon dating. And look, if anyone wants to email me or message me, I'll get back to them on this because this is highly critical. The reason I haven't posted about this is because I know there's going to be a backlash on this. But it's time to man up and do it. Again, statistical impossibility. The fact that this is even based on science instead of just someone looking through books. With Paul and Marcion, how about this? Okay, here we go. Todoruksimeon, 15th century. A Platonist. We can redate Plato, by the way, which I'm not going to bother talking about for the sake of this video, but we know if you actually look up Flamenco, and you can look up other people that have done this research, Flamenco's not alone. He's not sitting in a world all. He got about 1,000 people working for him, just so you know. His research isn't coming from one person. But he got other people that are independent, like me now, I guess, and that are actually writing books and saying, hey, ancient Greek history actually all dates to a different time. And they've looked at Plato and they've found Plato in a much different time period. Nevertheless, Todoruksimeon clashed with Catholic authorities, quote unquote Catholic. Gnostic, he was a Gnostic. He wrote that salvation is by grace and not by works of the law. He was associated with a Celio, Celio, Silas. Oh, okay. And his student was Marco Antonio Flamiano. What was Marco doing? Oh, I don't know. He somehow is walking around with short Pauline letters, like Marcion. He basically was a neo-Marcionite, a quote-unquote neo-Marcionite. We got to get rid of the word neo. And again, this all fits in. It shouldn't fit in. If mainstream chronology is right, this shouldn't fit. These people should not be here. Oh, by the way, Martin Luther, who comes right just like a few years after this, he's a monk. Think about what his job is to copy. Oh, look, the just shall live by faith. Oh, nobody ever figured that out. Nobody walked around for over 1,000 years. Nobody ever figured that out. Oh, maybe the church is wrong about this. And so Martin Luther, discovered that after 1,000 years. Or did he discover it after, or was he introduced to it by reading the text a few decades after? The Hebrew Bible fits in here as well. Called the Sephard Kabbalist, basically. There's a long story behind the Hebrew Bible, and I don't want to get into it right now, but I will say something about this. Erasmus. Someone has to be the final editor, especially of the New Testament. Why is Erasmus sending out people into Sephard in northern Israel trying to get copies of the Septuagint? You think the Septuagint would be rolling around everywhere, but no, he got to actually get copies of the Septuagint to make his Bible, his New Testament. And we know that he's editing parts of it because his letters going back and forth. Someone's still probably going to come on about the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Leningrad Codex, and all these other texts like the Codex Vaticanus, Codex Sinaiticus, which were only introduced in the 19th century, by the way. One of them was found in the garbage can. The other one was introduced by the Vatican. Look. Oh, the Gutenberg Bible, not even attributed until 100 years later anyway. The Wycliffe Bible is Catholic forgery anyway. I could get into all this, but why is it using Catholic text? Why is it using that? Think about it. The fact is, there isn't just Revelation. It isn't just the Pauline epistle. Every single book of the Bible, when you try to use the new chronology model and fit in the people, like, okay, we talked about the Old Testament. Here's one more. Moses talking to the nations like Moab and Edom, sending messages back and forth. He says, "We're going to march through your territory. We're not going to go to the right or to the left. Please let us pass through. We're going to stay on the King's Road." King's Road. So all these biblical commentaries and stuff, you know what they say about it? They said there was a road called the King's Road, which was built in the early 16th century. Just a thought. Just a thought. How about the Esther book, the Book of Esther? All fictional, other than Ahasuerus, they're all fictional, all these people. That's what I felt. Until you actually look at the events in the Ottoman court in the early 16th, late 15th, early 16th century, all the names and people are all there. All of them are there. Prophet 31. Oh, Lemuel, King Lemuel, he must be Solomon or something, because we can't find a King Lemuel in ancient history. Oh no, but I can find him in the 15th century, and I can find that his mother was a poet. Job, fictional character. Again, can't find him in ancient history. Job of Edessa is right there. And the name of his friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, they're all there. Coincidence? It rounds up to a statistical impossibility. This is why I had to jump on the new chronology, because what are you going to do? I sit here, plug my ears, put blindfolds on my eyes, and say, no, I'm going to stay in mainstream chronology because everybody else is doing it. Everybody else stays in it. I'm just going to be blind to this stuff and put it on the shelf when the statistics just add up. I'm not in a cult. I'm not in a cult anymore. I'm not going to be in a cult anymore. This idea that we have to follow Gallagher is so locked into us we don't even realize. Nobody realizes it. And when they see the chronology, they throw it away because it just doesn't fit their ideology. And that's what I did. And it is a cult mentality, but you don't even realize it. And it's that way for many things. We just think we know everything because for the last several hundred years it's been taught that way. And again, I'm not saying it's all conspiracy. I'm saying it's just a mistake made by one guy, basically. And it's not even worth dealing with. And it had become, it gets to the point that when you look at how they do radiocarbon dating, it just becomes ridiculous. They're trying to fit things into the chronology. It's just ridiculous. There are many radiocarbon dates, by the way, agree with new chronology. But they don't tell you about that. You actually have to go look it up. And you find that. So, here's one more. Isaiah chapter 19. Isaiah chapter 19. Oh, the waters of Egypt will be dried up. Oh, it's just a failed prophecy. Or did it happen in the early 16th century? Yeah, it did. You know that canal that's dug down there? When did that start getting built? You figure it out. You go look at yourself. And this goes into Islam too. Oh, Muhammad, he conquered Jerusalem and all that in the 7th century. Actually, there's Muhammad that conquered, quote, I already talked about it, Constantinople, 1453. By the way, the Quran looks to be earlier than the Old Testament. Did you know that? And again, it gets out to statistical impossibility. The Quran claims that Moses is Jesus' uncle. It seems ridiculous, the way that the biblical chronology is laid out. But when you actually go and look at who the Christ figure is, and it's Andronicus the first Camille, is who Flamenco thinks it is. I went and looked this up. I looked through all his family, at all the different people, all the things they did. I looked specifically at his uncle, and John II was named Ivan Mushka. And he led people out of the Ukraine from a land that had a similar name to Mizraim, that's the Hebrew word for Egypt, that's been transposed on Egypt, past Mount Horvela. He's known all over the place. In Ukraine, in Russia, he's known everywhere. As Ivan Mishka, as John. He almost drowned. John, the one that's immersed. This is more than one figure, by the way, in the Bible. He's also known as Bector John, but that's another topic that gets off the topic here, sort of. The point is, it rounds up to me to a lot of statistical impossibility that these events would just be like this. And then when I start checking Flamenco's dynastic parallelism, where you got these charts of his dynasty, you don't trust Flamenco. This is the whole point, being critical. I was critical of this when I first started this. So I go in and I check. When you start comparing these, it gets ridiculous. I noted this when I was actually doing the Hebrew Bible stuff, that, hey, you know, all these kings of Israel, they're following the same order as the Caesars. And this year of 4 emperors is in 1 Kings 16. That's weird. Maybe it's not so weird. You see, all the problems with biblical scholarship, all these different angles, the scholars and researchers come, and they got these different angles, and they all seem to conflict with each other. When you actually have new chronology, all of it makes sense. They're all right, but they don't have the whole piece. I'm not saying I have the whole thing either. So, Dr. Price will be released. He told me he'll probably be releasing a large paper I've done, and hopefully in a few months. I don't know when he'll be releasing it. He doesn't agree with it, I don't think, but I mean, he's open-minded, and that's the whole thing. And so I made this long half-hour video just saying that, you know, I was worried about backlash coming out with this, even admitting that I'm in this camp now. but it's time to man up and do it. And if you don't like that, that's too bad. Why don't you look for yourself? Why don't you ask me what convinced me? I'll send you a PDF of everything. I'll send it all to you. Okay, I've got a bunch of email addresses right in the video description. If you look, don't come and hey, I believe whatever they tell. Look, you're trapped in a mindset. Be a free thinker. Ask me questions. I don't have all the answers, but I'll send you what I've got. And then you can go look at other things for yourself. Don't just get in this mindset that you're wrong and I'm going to plug my ears and put blinders on my eyes because I don't want to accept it. That's what most people are going to do. I can guarantee you. And that's just too bad for them. Because that tells me that they're indoctrinated. Maybe not religiously, but they're indoctrinated one way or the other. Oh, yeah, my indoctrinated, you can argue. I just said I disagree with Flamenco about Revelation, didn't I? There are many places I disagree with him. But that's where we get into this part. He got the Quran. Nobody argued about this part. It's this part that this is interpretation. Okay? This is interpretation. But I have learned that when Flamenco says something, shut up and listen. He might be wrong, but shut up and listen and at least get it down till you understand it. Then you can go investigate it yourself. And there's no excuse today. You can pick this up. You can type in to ChatGPT or Grok or whatever you want to go into. Don't use Meta, by the way. You can go into whatever you want to go into and ask, is it true that this just approach it without using your chronology, approach it, say, in this date, did this happen? Is he right that there is a Balaam? Is he right that there's a Balak? And just look it up in 1354. Look, whatever you want to look up, you can just look it up. You don't have an excuse today. You have access. Flamenco didn't have this. He didn't have the internet at the beginning. He was behind the Iron Curtain. He didn't have AI. You do. You can look this up. But most people are not going to. I know that. So, I'm sorry if you want to unsubscribe. I am changing the name of the channel, possibly. We'll see what happens. If you want to unsubscribe, it doesn't bother me. I'm not making any money on this yet anyway. I don't even know if I ever will. But, it's too bad. If you want to unsubscribe, that's your choice. But it just tells me that you want to just plug your ears and be indoctrinated. That's fine by me. But if you want to know more, you stick around. Or even better, email me and I'll send you everything you want to know.